This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli wa nusallimu ala rasulihil kareem. Ma ba'd. So a few people have mentioned that they need to leave a bit early, etc. That's completely fine. Obviously, the full recording will be, inshallah, available for you on the Telegram group, and we'll upload it there. So we'll take it from there, inshallah ta'ala, and the documents, hopefully, the appropriate documents will be uploaded. Just a brief description of the course. So hopefully, we're planning to go through the books of the Hanafi Madhhab. If at any point, also by the way, if you notice the voice is going or the internet connection has gone, please do let me know. I've changed from Virgin Media to a different one now. So I don't know if the internet will be exactly the same. Please do let me know if the voice is cracking or it's not coming out clearly or something like that. We can try to sort it out, inshallah ta'ala. So what will we be covering? We're covering, inshallah, the books of the Hanafi Madhab. This will actually be taken from a book that I'm, alhamdulillah, compiling, which is actually an introduction to the Hanafi Madhab, which still needs to be completed, which might take a little bit more time, hopefully. This entire document will not be uploaded to Telegram, right? So, inshallah, I do hope I don't have anyone asking when will this full document be uploaded. The full book is not going to be uploaded, obviously, because I'm still working on it. But the few sections that we will be covering, I will upload that, obviously, in PDF form, with obviously the caveat that, inshallah ta'ala, it's an amana, and that you don't share it with anyone outside of the group, as in it doesn't go beyond the group. And if you need to discuss it with someone, that's completely fine. You want to print it out for yourself, that's fine. You want to discuss it with students, teachers, that's completely fine. What you can't do is share the soft copy with anyone. That's I would really not like you to do that, and I'd appreciate if you respect that as well, inshallah ta'ala. Um, so so firstly, we'll begin by actually looking at, now I didn't actually promise that we do this, but I think it's important we do. So very, very briefly, I'm just actually going to discuss with you the history of how fiqh actually came about. Um, and I do actually go through this in classes and stuff like that. And I do know that some of the people who have joined the course are actually students of mine, or people who join the class live in classes that I teach. So I do apologize. They may find this like as though something we've already covered in class, but I think it will be very beneficial to go through with the new satis and people that we have on the group. By the way, as a caveat, as a disclaimer, all the time we just mentioned this in our course before we start, which is that in terms of approach, our approach will be hopefully in line with the scholars of our elders, our akabirin, who we consider in line with the school that is the Deobandi school. But that does not mean that there will be any disrespect or at all, inshallah ta'ala, towards any other school. We may disagree with other schools, we may disagree with even our own school at times on certain things, but it will, inshallah ta'ala, all be with respect. And if at any point you feel like that this comment was unnecessary or this, then just let me know, inshallah. I'm all ears to any criticism, or even someone who's not happy with something that I said. And also, I'm also here to learn. So if there's anything that you notice you didn't agree with, or any extra mulahadat, etc., that you have, feel free to. I can't guarantee I'll be able to respond to you in time because of the schedule and stuff that I have as well, and I'm sure you have a busy schedule. But inshallah ta'ala, I'll try my best to accommodate. Okay, so we'll first begin with how Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught fiqh to the Sahaba, and how did these fuqaha come about, and how did the books of fiqh come about. So before we understand essentially how books of fiqh are written, we kind of need to know how fiqh is taught. How did Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam essentially teach the Sahaba? So for that, I would recommend a very, very good book that has been written by Mullah Abdul Halim Nu'mani. Uh, it's it's by the name of Lamhat min al-Tarbiyya al-Fiqhiyya by Mullah Abdul Halim al-Nu'mani. He's passed away very recently, late, rahimahullah. And he's written a very good small book that explains how Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam used to teach the Sahaba fiqh. So what we notice is that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would give commandments of Sharia in a very concise manner. And in fact, the fatwa of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam it is the source of all the books of the Hanafi madhab, and not just Hanafi madhab, but Maliki madhab, Hanbali madhab, Shafi'i madhab, and all the madhahib. They are no madhahib on their own. They are just, you could say, streams to the source of the fountain. They are all streams of the fountain, which is Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that is actually the analogy that Abdul Hayy al-Lakhnawi uses in the Muqaddimah of Al-Fawaid al-Bahiyya, that these madhahib are streams towards the fountain of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the first person to teach fiqh, encourage Sahaba to, you could say, learn fiqh, write fiqh. And how did he do it? Essentially, he used, you could say, 4 stages. And this is how Abdul Halim explains it, that there was 4 stages. The first one was marhalatul targhib, which is the Prophet ﷺ would encourage the Sahaba in developing jurisprudential abilities, tafaqquh, and attempting to understand how the rulings of Sharia may be derived. So this may be referred to as the stage of encouragement. So if I want you to do something, if I want to encourage someone to do something, the first thing I have to do is encourage them, give them the virtues of doing it, right? Our whole deen is essentially based upon the idea of fada'il, right? That we only do things for some reward at the end of it, whether that's Jannah, whether that's taqarrub ma'Allah. Each person has a different ummeed from his actions, but there has to be some end goal, there has to be some virtue. It can't be that do it because we're just telling you to do and there's no benefit within it for you. You only do things that are beneficial to you, and you can only know that benefit if someone tells you that this is the benefit of encouraging it, of getting involved in it. So the first thing that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did always to get the Sahaba to engage in fiqh, to codify fiqh, to write fiqh, to whatever, to learn fiqh, to understand fiqh, was to encourage them and mention to them the rewards of engaging in this field. And we have so many ahadith. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam essentially says the reward for engaging in fiqh or ilm. So you got مَن يُرِدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ, authentic hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari, hadith number 71. You got Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam tells the Sahaba, إِذَا حَكَمَ الْحَاكِمْ فَاجْتَهَدَ فَأَصَابَ فَلَهُ أَجْرَانِ وَإِذَا حَكَمَ فَاجْتَهَدَ ثُمَّ أَخْطَأَ فَلَهُ أَجْرٌ. So you can see, and this hadith is in Sahih al-Bukhari again. So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is mentioning that even if you make a mistake, no worries, you'll still get reward. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam also says, نَضَّرَ اللَّهُ إِمْرًا سَمِعَ مِنَّا حَدِيثًا فَحَفِظَهُ حَتَّى يُبَلِّغَهُ فَرُبَّ مُبَلَّغٍ أَوْعَى مِنْ سَامِعٍ. So you have this nature as well, which is found in Sunan Abi Dawood. So you have a hadith where Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is essentially encouraging Sahaba to engage in fiqh, to come and learn fiqh. That's the first stage. We have to get them to like fiqh, engage in fiqh, and that is something for us as teachers also, those people who teach, or even students. You're not going to do something unless you're given the results behind it. You only do well in an exam if you know the mark scheme, in the sense that you know what type of answer to write and you know what the examiner is looking for. In the same way, you kind of need to know, what am I going to get out of doing this, right? So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did that. It's amazing. We learn that the greatest teacher, as we know, is Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Look at the way in which he taught. He first encouraged the students to learn, right? And that's something for us as teachers, that encourage the students to learn, right? Give them the reward of engaging in ilm. And that's something that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would do first. So you've got the very, very famous hadith in Sunan Abi Dawood, wherein a person travels from very far to come and acquire a hadith from Abu Darda radiallahu anhu. And Abu Darda asked him that, have you come for tijara? Have you come for this? He says, no, I've come simply to acquire this hadith from you. So then he says, okay, let me tell you a hadith just to encourage you and show you that you've done such an amazing action. So in Sunan Abi Dawud, he says, من سلك طريقا يطلب فيه علما سلك الله به طريقا من طرق الجنة. And the hadith goes on, وإن الملائكة لا تضع أجنحتها رضا لطالب العلم ما يصنع بما يصنع. And then the hadith is a lengthy hadith, حتى الحيتان في جوف الماء أو إن العالم لا يستغفر له من في السماوات وما في الأرض حتى الحيتان في جوف الماء وإن فضل العالم على العابد كفضل القمر على سائر ليلة البدر على سائر الكواكب وإن العلماء ورثة الأنبياء وإن الأنبياء لم يورثوا دينارا ولا درهما وإنما ورثوا العلم فمن أخذه أخذ بحظ وافر. Lengthy hadith in Sunan Abi Dawud where Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is essentially encouraging Sahaba that, look, this is my wirathat, you got to get involved in this. So after he's done marhalatul targhib, we come to marhalatul ta'aleem wa tafqih. This is where actually the active role of now teaching, when Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam literally teaches the Sahaba, and that happened in two places. In Makkah, it was in Darul Arqam, and in Medina, it was the Ashab al-Suffah that used to be taught, that used to come to learn. We know that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was teaching in Makkah. Why? If you look at the story of the acceptance of Umar radiallahu anhu when he accepts Islam, he actually, in that story, he wants to touch the Quran. And his sister tells him, إِنَّكَ رِجْسٌ وَإِنَّهُ لَا يَمَسُّهُ إِلَّا الْمُطَهَّرُونَ فَقُمْ فَاغْتَسِلْ أَوْ تَوَضَّأْ. So stand up and perform wudu or ghusl. Do one of the two. How did she know that? How did she know that you can't touch this Quran, etc.? Definitely her husband will have taught her, and he learned it from Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? So that was marhalatul ta'lim wa tafqih, and there's loads of examples of this. Imam Abdul Halim gives more examples. Then we come to stage 3. So we had marhalatul targhib, marhalatul ta'lim wa tafqih, then we have marhalatul tamreen wa tahqiq. In this stage, essentially what Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam is doing is he's testing the Sahaba. But at the same time, what's the purpose of a test? The test is to make you learn, right? Why do we have exams in school, etc.? To prepare the students for learning. Yes, it is also to see whether they're capable, but at the same time, it's also to get them to learn. The best way to get students to learn something is to give them a test and imtihan on it, and then they'll learn very well the subjects that you're teaching. So in the same way, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would test the Sahaba. How have you understood this? And then in the test, he'd be teaching them to link up one mas'ala with another mas'ala. So he'd be teaching them the laws of qiyas, which is essentially what fiqh is. Most rulings of fiqh, you could say, the direct thing that they based upon is qiyas. Yes, from a distant perspective, they are relying definitely upon Quran and Sunnah. Everything's upon Quran and Sunnah. So we have stories where Nabi is actively teaching Sahaba how to extract rulings and how to link one mas'ala with another mas'ala. And those who've done the authority of the Sunnah and Hanafi principles of Hadith course with us will remember legal meanings, and this idea that in Hanafi fiqh everything is connected. The masail of one chapter are connected to the masail of another chapter. And something that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam essentially taught to the Sahaba, that these ma'akhidhu sharia, these legal meanings, connecting one legal meaning from one chapter to the legal meaning of another chapter, that all you could say Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam came with that same idea of teaching that to the Sahaba. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam couldn't give a ruling on every single mas'ala that may occur till the day of Qiyamah, but what he did was he taught us those maqasid al-sharia, those, when I say maqasid, I'm not talking about vague maqasid, like really like intricate maqasid of every chapter in fiqh, through which we can kind of understand how this chapter of fiqh works, the methodology of sharia within it, and how to extract new rulings from it. So we got example, for example, Abdullah ibn Abbas states that أنه أتى رجل إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. The hadith is in Sahih al-Bukhari. فقال له إن أختي نذرت أن تحج وإنها ماتت. فقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لو كان عليها دين أكنت قاضيه؟ قال نعم. قال فقد الله فهو أحق بالقضاء. A man comes to Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and he says that my sister made a vow to perform Hajj and she's passed away. Now, does she have to, what should I do? Should I, get someone to perform Hajj for her, etc.? Should I do a Hajj on her behalf? So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says, look, if she had a debt, of wealth, wouldn't you have to give it? So he says, yes. So he says, then give the debt of Allah. It's more worthy. So you can see he's making that person think that, look, I can just give you the ruling. Yes, do the Hajj on her behalf. But no, he doesn't do that. He tests the person a little bit. And in that process, he kind of teaches him that, look, this is not so different from that ruling. Link them up. So he's teaching. These are all processes. So sometimes we read these hadith and we just think this is a ruling, this is a hukam from Nabi, this is a hukam from Nabi. But really, Nabi was very unique, and obviously the most unique individual in the history of the world, essentially. But what I mean by very unique is that you rarely get someone who's able to give rulings and teach at the same time. And Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was able to do that. Sometimes you get a really good teacher, but he's got a really good teaching method. But when it comes to like just giving general rulings of fatwa, etc., he can't do his own personal research too well, but he can teach whatever he's learned really well. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam could do both. He could teach as he's giving rulings. And this is what we have an example of in the hadith of Umar radiallahu anhu, when he comes to Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and he says, هششت وقبلت وأنا صائم فقلت يا رسول الله فعلت اليوم أمرا فظيعا فقبلت وأنا صائم قال أرأيت لو مضمضت من الماء وأنت صائم. So he says that Umar radiallahu anhu comes to Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and he says, I've done a really problematic thing. I've kissed my wife in the state of fasting. So now basically my fast is broken, right? So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says, look, if you were to gargle water into your mouth and spit it out, would that break your fast? So he makes him think, oh yeah, that doesn't break my fast, so why should this break my fast? So he's doing tafqih, he's teaching them to think beyond just the ruling. He's saying, he's linking one ruling up with the other. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is building a type of law here. He's creating law. As he's, is very, very unique. If you understand it, hopefully you know what I'm talking about. Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, for example, narrates that Abu Dharr radiallahu anhu said, that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam once said, وَمُبَاضَعَتُكَ أَهْلَكَ صَدَقَةً, that basically having conjugal relations with your wife is a form of sadaqah, right? Or fulfilling the rights of your wife. قُلْنَا يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. So they said, this doesn't make any sense. Look, a person fulfills his personal desire and it turns out to be a form of charity. How is that? So he says, look, let's link it up. Think about this a bit carefully. So you notice what Muhammad al-Halim is trying to do in this book. He's trying to show, okay, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam gave the Sahaba encouragement to use their aql a bit, right? Not just a bit, but a lot. But at the same time, you do inqiyad and you bow yourself to the rulings of Sharia, but do use your aql as well. And you'll notice the Hanafi fiqh is based upon a little bit of rational sciences as well. So he says, قال نعم أرأيت لو جعل تلك الشهوة فيما حرم الله عليه ألم أكن عليه وزر. Do you not see that if he were to put his desire in a haram place, wouldn't he have got punishment for it? So he says, بلى. قال فإنه إذا جعلها فيما حل الله عز وجل فهي صدقة. So if he's put it in a halal place, then he should get a reward for it. So he's kind of teaching them that, look, why are you getting surprised by this? You should already know this. It's linked to that mas'ala. It's linked to this mas'ala. Drawing links, basically. By the way, this hadith of Umar was in Abu Dawud, and this hadith was in Imam Ahmad's Musnad. Other examples, but I still need to fill some of them in, but you can find them, like I said, in the book of Muhammad al-Halim al-Nu'mani. Anyway, we need to move on. So after مرحلة التمرين والتحقيق, you've got مرحلة التطبيق العملي, and this is the final stage, where now Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam has encouraged the Sahabi to come and learn. He's learned, he's been tested, as in he's been shown a bit more masail and how to link one mas'ala up with another. Now we get tatbiq al-amali, practical demonstration, which means someone's going to come with a question, you're going to answer it, right? You're going to answer it. So this is a form of examination, but it's like more practical. If you were to think of it, it's like when you come into madrasa, people encourage you, you should go study in a madrasa. It's really good for you, it's beneficial for you. Okay, now you go study, then you do the studying, that's the ta'lim, then you get an exam, then an iftah question comes when now you have to actually answer this person who's coming from outside for help. So Imam al-Hakim rahimahullah narrates from Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Amr radiyallahu anhu that he said, أن رجلين اختصما إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فقال عمرو اقضي بينهما فقال أقضي بينهما وأنا رسول الله قال نعم على أنك إن صبت فلك 10 أجور وإن اجتهدت فأخطأت فلك أجر. That two people come to Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam and they basically disputing, and he tells Amr ibn al-As that you Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, sorry, that should say Amr ibn al-As at the top, sorry. He tells him that you rule between them. So he says, أقضي بينهما, how can I rule when you're here? So he says, no, rule, you'll get 10 rewards if you get it right, and if you get a mistake, you still get 1 reward. So essentially, this is like fatwa training, essentially. Imam Ahmad rahimahullah narrates from Aqil al-Muzani, he said, أمرني النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أن أقضي بين قوم فقلت ما أحسن أن أقضي يا رسول الله قال الله مع القاضي ما لم يحف أحدا عمدا. That he says, Maqil radiyallahu anhu actually says, no, I'm not good at giving fatwas. So he says, give it, Allah will be with the person as long as he does not neglect this position. Again, I'm not saying okay, we need to go give fatwas and everything, but I'm just saying, okay, look how Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is teaching the Sahaba practical. Then the best example is how many people Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam sent to the different lands around Medina and gave them permission to issue fatwa and do judicial decrees. One of them being Mu'adh radiyallahu anhu, where he sent him to Yemen, and he actually كيف تقضي إذا عرض لك قضاء. And when he gave the right answers, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, Alhamdulillah alladhi waffaqa Rasulullah lima yarda Rasulullah. Right? This hadith has a long discussion, we won't get into it, but many scholars have said that it's authentic, but in terms of looking at the تلقي بالقبول of it. So Khatib al-Baghdadi, Ibn Abd al-Barr says it, Al-Madkhal of al-Bayhaqi, he mentions it, Ibn al-Qayyim mentions it, right? There's a long discussion by Kawthari on this issue as well in his maqalat, and then it was refuted by Albani in his silsila. But you could argue that Sheikh Albani is not really looking at it maybe from this perspective that Khatib and Ibn Abdul Barr and Bayhaqi are looking at, right? He's looking at it from a pure Shafi'i Hadithi perspective, looking at Sanad and Sanad only, and not perhaps some of the other issues. But nonetheless, I don't want to get into that. So we had the Sahaba who were taught these this method of fiqh, and essentially this method of fiqh came down. It came to Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, I won't get into this because this is not the purpose of the course, but essentially Abdullah ibn Mas'ud taught many students in Kufa. From amongst them was the very famous student of his, Alqama ibn Qais. And Alqama ibn Qais then goes on to teach Ibrahim al-Nakha'i. Ibrahim al-Nakha'i goes on to teach Hammad ibn Abi Sulaiman, and Hammad ibn Abi Sulaiman goes on to teach Abu Hanifa rahimahullah. And as we very famously, this was all the methodology that they adopted was the methodology of Ahlul Ra'i. And Ahlul Ra'i is not not in the meaning of that they would apply their Ra'i and their own legal, their own way of thinking. Rather, as we have discussed in our second course in Hanafi Usul Hadith, we've explained that it was the fact that they would have a bit of a more rationalistic approach, and they would look at the matan of the hadith a bit more. This has all been explained in the second course that we did. So anyway, Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah essentially becomes the warith of the ulum of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. Before him, it was Ibrahim Hammad ibn Abi Sulaiman, and before him, Ibrahim al-Nakha'i. Probably the three most important figures in the Hanafi Madhhab are these three. One is obviously Abu Hanifa himself, the second one is Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, and the third one is Abdullah Mas'ud. And these three are definitely the most important individuals when it comes to the Hanafi Madhhab. Now, I won't go into the development of the Hanafi Madhhab, that's again not the focus of this course, but just for those people who want to know about the biography of Hanifa and the famous Hanafi fuqaha, because we will come across quite a few Hanafi fuqaha in this course, and where could you read up more about their biographies, because it's only 8 lessons, so I may not be able to go into full details about who they are and who they were, and I'll give you a brief explanation of who they are. But if you want to read up more about some of these early Hanafi fuqaha, then you can read it in these books that are coming just now. So one of the best books to go back to read about Abu Hanifa and his students and his students' students, and probably that's as far as it goes, because he obviously passed away in 335, which is obviously not too long after Abu Hanifa as well. Abu Hanifa rahimahullah passed away 150. So it's the book by Ibn Abi al-Awam. It's called Fadailu Abi Hanifa wa Akhbaruhu wa Manaqibuh. It's found through the narration of Ahmad ibn Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn Muhammad ibn Ahmad ibn al-Awam, who narrates from his father Muhammad, who narrates from his father Muhammad, who narrates from his father Abdullah. So some people thought that this book is actually written by Abdullah. There's a long detailed discussion in the footnotes here about who is the author of this book, and there's a long discussion about Sheikh Abdul Rahman ibn Yahya al-Muallimi, who has written a book called At-Tankil bima fi ta'nib al-Kawthari min al-Abatil, and he claims that the author of this book is Majhul. Then Dr. Hamza Bakri, in his footnotes on Husn al-Taqadi, he gives a lengthy refutation, not lengthy but like quite good refutation on Muallimi's concerns. This book is really good. So this is a picture of the book if you just want to see it. It's been printed by the tahqiq of Sheikh Latif Rahman al-Bahraiji. It's a good book, very beneficial. He narrates everything with a chain of narration. He's from the students of Imam Tahawi. He's from amongst the students of the book of Imam Tahawi, and he does actually narrate from Imam Tahawi in the book as well. Kawthari says with regards to the book, min anfa'il kutub fi hadha al-mawdu'. It's one of the most beneficial books in this field, in this topic. The two individuals, and this should tell you everything. From amongst those scholars who have narrated this book from Ibn Abi al-Awam, either two ruwat of Fadail Abi Hanifa are Shihabuddin al-Quda'i and Abdul Ghani ibn Sa'id al-Azdi. These are two very big muhaddithin, right? Abdul Ghani ibn Sa'id al-Azdi is a student of ad-Darqutni and many others, and Shihabuddin al-Quda'i is also very big, Muhaddith and Musnad al-Shihab and many other many other books as well. Ibn Sa'id, Abdul Ghani ibn Sa'id al-Azdi is a student of Daraqutni. In fact, when he wrote a book, Al-Mu'talaf al-Mukhtalaf, Daraqutni took the book from him. Daraqutni acquired the book from him. So he was actually embarrassed that, you're my teacher. How can I narrate a book to you? How can I teach you? So Daraqutni says, no, you've written the book. I'll acquire the book from you. And he respects his student like that. Anyway, two very big muhaddithin. So this book is definitely very, very one of the most authoritative sources for the life of Abu Hanifa, I would say, to the best of my knowledge anyway. Again, you can correct me if you find something contradictory, but it is Fadailu Abi Hanifa wa Akhbaruhu wa Manaqibuh. Very, very good kitab. Then you got Saymari's book, who wrote a book called Akhbaru Abi Hanifa wa Ashabuh. Akhbaru Abi Hanifa wa Ashabi. This is a very early biographical source written on the life of Abu Hanifa. But the issue with this book is that many of the chains of narrations do go through individual by the name of Ahmad ibn Salt. Ibn al-Mughallas, I think he is referred to as, and he has been labeled as a liar by some muhaddithun. There has been a defense made of him as well by scholars. I think Kawthari also tries to defend him, etc. No, actually, if I'm not mistaken, Kawthari actually says we don't need him. In his Ta'nib al-Khatib, Kawthari says Ibn al-Mughallas is a kadhabi. I think Kawthari also agrees with it, and he doesn't like him as well. But I'm not 100% sure on that, so don't quote me on it. But nonetheless, Khatib, he's a teacher of Khatib. Saymari is a teacher of Khatib, passed away 436. So Khatib al-Baghdadi, I'm getting a bit of shock on that death date because Khatib passed away 463. But anyway, Khatib narrates many riwayat through As-Saymari. The Khatib narrates a number of riwayat through Saymari's Akhbar wa Abi Hanifa wa Ashabuhu. So it is a good book. It's a very small book, but it is quite beneficial in the sense that it doesn't just cover Abu Hanifa. Just like this book, it doesn't just cover Abu Hanifa. Ibn Abil Awam's book doesn't just cover Abu Hanifa, it covers the students of Abu Hanifa as well. So that doesn't have mention of the ashab of Abu Hanifa, but it does cover some of his ashab and a number of his ashab as well. However, this Akhbar Abi Hanifa, it actually does cover a number of the students of Abu Hanifa as well, and their manaqib, etc. It's really, really beneficial kitab. Then you've got the book of Al-Muwaffaq al-Makki, who wrote a book called Al-Manaqib, in regards to the manaqib of Abu Hanifa. This book is quite big, and it was actually kind of, you could say, summarized or reworded by another scholar by the name of Muhammad ibn Muhammad al-Kardari, the author of Al-Fatawa al-Bazzaziyah. He also wrote a book called Al-Manaqib. These two books have been printed together. So if you look at 150, the author of Fatawa al-Bazzaziyah, this book in Al-Manaqib, it's simply Muwaffaq al-Makki's book, but without the chains of narration. It has actually been printed with Al-Muwaffaq al-Makki, rahimahullah's book. So these two books have been printed together. So just to show you again, Muwaffaq al-Makki's Al-Manaqib, along with the book of Muhammad ibn Muhammad al-Kardari. These two books have been printed. I have got a PDF of them available. There's a really old print of it as well, which is available online, and there's a really newer print of it, printed by, I think, Alam al-Kutub or Darul Kutub or something like that. But it's harder to get hold of the PDF of the new one, but I do have it. So inshallah, I'll try to share it. It's really hard to get hold of this book, by the way. Then you've got Sibt ibn al-Jawzi wrote a book called Al-Intisar li-Imam A'immat al-Amsar. This book is quite good as well. It's been printed by Al-Kawthari with ta'liqat on it as well. Then we have a really good book by Dhahabi called Manaqib al-Imam Abi Hanifa wa Sahibay. This book was actually printed by Mullah Abu al-Wafa al-Afghani. But before he printed it, what happened was that he sent it to Sheikh Zahid al-Kawthari, and Sheikh Zahid al-Kawthari added on footnotes to the book and like mulahadat and etc. And then therefore it was then printed by Mullah Abu al-Wafa al-Afghani with the kind of footnotes, or you could say extra additions by Sheikh Zahid al-Kawthari. And he actually did this, Mullah Abu al-Wafa did this ala Sayyid al-Awza'i of Imam Abu Yusuf as well. But Dhahabi, in his biography of what he says, what prompted him to print this book, by the way, is that he came across Abu Hanifa's biography in Siyar A'lam al-Nubala, a book by Hafiz al-Dhahabi, and in that biography Dhahabi actually says that وَقَدْ أَفْرَدْتُ, he says, I've made a separate book for the Manaqib of Abu Hanifa and his two companions. So that's what prompted Mullah Abul Wafa al-Afghani to go and really, look for this book. He found it, decided to print it, but before he printed it, he sent it to Sheikh Zahid al-Kawthari to just have a look at it again. And and I think Kawthari also, he corrected certain parts, as in certain parts were not so readable in certain places. If I'm not mistaken, he corrects certain bits. I could be wrong on that. It's a bit vague exactly. My memory on that part may not be too accurate, but if I'm not mistaken, that is why he sends it to Kawthari. But nonetheless, Kawthari adds footnotes, and he prints the footnotes with it. And there was an old print of this, but now it's been printed again. It's exactly the same print by this. So if you're hoping to open this book and you're expecting a brand new copy, like typed up and stuff, it's not really like that. It's just the old print, exactly the old print, but he just puts references they just put references to it's an old print, but the page numbers have changed. So they just put references to the old page numbers on the sides of this book. But it's a really small book, really beneficial. I would say if you're a Hanafi and you've not read a book on the Manaqib of Abu Hanifa, then you really should. You really should. It is very beneficial. Then you got Najmuddin al-Tarsusi wrote a book called Wafayat al-A'yan fi Madhhab al-Nu'man. This book, if I'm not mistaken, has also been printed now fairly recently. I've not had access to it. Salahuddin Abdullah ibn Muhammad ibn Ibrahim ibn al-Muhandis wrote a large biography on the scholars of the Hanafi Madhhab. Then you have Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Qurashi, who wrote a book called Al-Jawahir al-Mudiyya fi Tabaqat al-Hanafi. This is arguably one of the earliest books actually written on the Tabaqat of the Hanafi. So if you notice, a lot of these books before Abdul Qadir al-Qurashi were mainly based around Abu Hanifa and his ashab, or his ashabul ashab. The first book to kind of really try and go beyond the ashabul ashab and really write a biography on all the main Hanafis that have come was Abdul Qadir al-Qurashi's Al-Jawahir al-Mudiyya. And he's a really, really talented scholar. In fact, he was a contemporary of the author of Nasb al-Raya, Zayla'i. So him and Zayla'i actually studied under some of the same shuyukh. So for example, Alauddin al-Turkumani, the author of Al-Jawhar al-Naqi fi Raddi ala Sunan al-Bayhaqi, that was their teacher. So the author of Al-Jawhar al-Naqi, who has written a refutation of Bayhaqi's Sunan, the author of that book is the teacher of both of these scholars, Abdul Qadir al-Qurashi, and the author of Nasb al-Raya of al-Zayla'i. He's also written al-Takhrij and al-Hidayah, by the way, Abdul Qadir al-Qurashi, which will, I think, be printed soon by Sheikh Awama as well. He's got a full methodology of how he basically goes about in this book. He came across actually the works of Tarasusi and Ibn al-Muhandis, and then he built his work upon the works of the two scholars who came before him. The really unique feature of this print, by the way, Al-Jawahir al-Mudiyya, and if you want to get yourself a copy of it, it's really good, 4 volumes, and it's been printed by arguably one of the most talented muhaqqiqeen of his time, Abdul Fattah Muhammad al-Hallu. He was really early muhaqqiq, in the sense that, if I'm not mistaken, he's in the time of Sheikh Ahmad Shakir and all of these guys as well, or around their period. And around the time wherein it was very hard to get manuscripts, very hard to read manuscripts. There was no softwares, and they had to rely on manuscripts of books which nowadays we just take for granted that they've been published. So his tahqiq is good on the book, and it's a really well edited book. So do be wary. You can get this 1 volume DKI edition, avoid it. Get yourself the good 4-volume edition by Sheikh Abdul Fattah. This is not Sheikh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda. This one is different. I don't know if they're related. I don't think they are, wallahu alam. But he's got detailed muqaddimah as well, about 82-page muqaddimah on how he worked on Al-Jawahir al-Mudiyya. And it's interesting, he's printing this book at a time where in many books have not yet printed. So just to give you the date, I don't know if I've put in here when it was printed, the year. I don't think I have, but you can have a look in there. It was printed fairly early. Then we've got نظم الجمان في طبقات أصحاب إمامنا النعمان by Ibn Daqmaq al-Qahiri. Ibn Daqmaq al-Qahiri. Kawthari refers to this book every now and then as well. It's a good book. Then you've got this famous book that we mentioned, the author of Fatawa al-Bazaziyah, who's written a Manaqib book. Then you got Aini's book. Aini wrote a book which Allama Qasim ibn Qutubgha rahimahullah summarized. So Taj al-Tarajim is a book written by Qasim ibn Qutubgha. This is the person who has written the book At-Tasheeh wa Tarjih upon Mukhtasar al-Quduri. So as we know, Quduri has various he quotes the opinions of Abu Hanifa, Abu Yusuf, and Imam Muhammad, but he doesn't give tarjih, he doesn't give preference over which opinion he prefers over the other. So Qasim ibn Qutubugha comes in his Tasheeh wa Tarjih, which is he's a student of Ibn al-Humam. He comes and he passed at 79. He comes in his At-Tasheeh wa Tarjih and he shows you which opinion is preferred by quoting the early scholars. And his Muqaddimah to At-Tasheeh wa Tarjih is really good because he's got a detailed introduction to Mustalah al-Hadith in his introduction to At-Tasheeh wa Tarjih, Qasim al-Qutubugha. But he's actually also written a book on the Tarajim of the Hanafis, Taj al-Tarajim, in which he took Aini had written a book on the biographies of the Hanafi fuqaha. He took that and he essentially summarized it in a book called Taj al-Tarajim. Right? It's a good book, one volume, beneficial, there's stories in there which you may not find in other books as well. And there are examples of that. We will come to it when we come to Sarakhsi's biography. Um, uh, then we've got Ibn Shihna wrote Tabaqat al-Hanafiyah. You've got Suyuti wrote Tabyidu al-Sahifa bimanaqib al-Imam Abi Hanifa. Again, this is more on the manaqib section. I have combined the two a little bit. Books written, I think they call them biographies, when they're written on one specific individual of the past. If you want to, by the way, a nice, good khulasa of all of these different books, there's a book written called Imam Abu Hanifa ke Manaqib par likhi gayi kitabe, a small maqala written by Mullah Ubaid Akhtar Rahmani, who wrote a small maqala for Majallatu Bahth wa Nadhr of Mullah Khalid Sayfullah's, I think, magazine. I think they publish it. So I've kind of combined the two because what we notice with the Manaqib books on Abu Hanifa is that they actually do end up discussing some of the Ashab as well. So you've got Tabyid al-Sahifa. This was actually printed by Mullah Ashiq Ilahi, but the Muqaddimah by Mullah Abdul Rashid al-Nu'mani is very good. It was actually his Makanatul Imam bi Hanifa is actually a Muqaddimah to this book as well. So if you read Makanatul Imam bi Hanifa of Mullah Abdul Rashid al-Nu'mani, you realize it's just the Muqaddimah of Tabyid al-Sahifa. It's the Muqaddimah that he essentially wrote for Tabyid al-Sahifa. I'm not sure he wrote for Tabyid al-Sahifa or Mullah Ashiq Ilahi put it into at the start of Tabyid al-Sahifa. If I'm not mistaken, he wrote it for Tabyid al-Sahifa, but I could be wrong. Then you've got probably the best book, and I can genuinely say that if you've read this book, inshallah ta'ala, you do not need to read another book, or like it will suffice you. Every student in the Hanafi Madhhab, or every Hanafi, any serious Hanafi, should be reading this book at least. And it's actually been written by a Shafi'i, by Muhammad ibn Yusuf al-Salihi, the famous author of the famous, very big Seerah book, Subul al-Huda wal-Rashad. Same one. He wrote a book, Uqud al-Juman fi Manaqib al-Imam Abi Hanifa al-Nu'man. It's a really good book, a really, really good book. Uqud al-Juman fi Manaqib al-Imam al-A'zam Abi Hanifa al-Nu'man. Again, printed by Mullah Abul Wafghani. I've just written here, it's written by a Shafi'i Muhaddith, and it's actually one of the important books written in the biography of Abu Hanifa, because he actually discusses some of the usul of Abu Hanifa in Hadith. Along with that, he actually also discusses all the previous biographies written on Abu Hanifa. He seems to have had access to all of them. In fact, Mullah Abul Wafa al-Afghani mentions in the Muqaddimah that I'm surprised at how many books he's able to quote we don't even have access to today. Right? Then you've got Alama ibn Tulun wrote a book called Al-Ghuraf al-Aliyah fi Tarajim Mutaakhir al-Hanafiyya, which I think has been printed as well now. Ibn Hajar al-Makki wrote Al-Khayrat al-Hisan fi Manaqib al-Imam Abi Hanifa al-Nu'man. So you have three Shafi'is essentially writing books on Abu Hanifa. As-Suyuti, Muhammad ibn Yusuf al-Salihi, and Ibn Hajar al-Makki. Ibn Hajar al-Makki, essentially his book is just Uqud al-Juman kind of summarized. He's primarily just relied upon, and he says it in the he says in the Muqaddimah that I came across the book of Muhammad ibn Yusuf al-Salih, and I decided to just basically add to it, codify it a bit, build on it. So it is basically built upon his Shafi'i contemporaries book. Then we'll come to these books as well, many of which have been printed. We'll come to Ibn al-Hina'i's Tabaqat al-Fiqh. But as I can see the time now, we just come to 6 o'clock. If it's okay, if you can just give me time, I'm just going to go pray Asr, Salah, in Darul Uloom. It's at 6 o'clock. If you don't mind, I'm just going to pop in. Darul Uloom is close by. So inshallah, it won't take more than 10 minutes. So inshallah, I do apologize for this. But at 10 past 6, inshallah, ta'ala, we'll carry on. You can have a bit of a break as well. But we'll carry on, inshallah, ta'ala, at 10 past 6. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sincerest apologies, gone over by 3 minutes there. ठीक है inshallah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Nahmadu wa nusalli wa nusallimu ala Rasul Karim ma ba'd. Okay, so after that we had so Ibn al-Hina'i rahimahullah wrote a book called Tabaqat al-Hanafiyah. So this book has also now been printed. It's available. It's detailed. The tahqiq is really good. So it's in about, I think, 3 volumes, 4 volumes. It's been printed in. You'll find a few fawaid in there that you won't find anywhere else. But the really brilliant book that was written was this one. So Al-Kafawi, essentially, Mahmud ibn Sulaiman al-Kufi, rahimahullah, famously known as Al-Kafawi. So Mahmud ibn Sulaiman al-Kafawi, right? He wrote a book called Kataibu A'lam al-Akhyar min fuqaha madhhab al-Nu'man al-Mukhtar, in which he covers essentially like 800 Hanafi fuqaha. And this was actually one of the best books ever written on Hanafi fuqaha in general, and it's now been printed in this beautiful edition by Maktabatul Irshad, and like 5 muhaqqiqin essentially worked upon it. This was the book that, as we'll come to later on, Al-Fawaid al-Bahiyya by Mawlana Abdul Hayy al-Lakhnawi is essentially a summary of Kataibu A'lam al-Akhyar. So this book that we'll come to just now, I don't know if I've put a picture of it, so I'll not put a picture of Al-Fawaid al-Bahiyya, but it's a book by many Hanafis will know about it, and you will have heard of it as well. But it's a book by Mawlana Abdul Hayy al-Lakhnawi, wherein he goes through the Hanafi fuqaha. Al-Fawaid al-Bahiyya fi Tarajim al-Hanafiyya. He essentially took Kataibu A'lam al-Akhyar of Al-Kafawi, and essentially he summarizes the entire book. And then for every book, at times he will say Qultu. That's basically Mawlana Abdul Hayy al-Lakhnawi rahimahullah talking. Then you've got Allama Taqiyuddin al-Tamimi. The book, by the way, is really good. This Kataibu A'lam al-Akhyar, the really unique and brilliant feature of it is, if you want to know the muqaddimah of every book, sometimes he quotes the full muqaddimah of certain books, and some of those books we don't even have access to. So they're not even in manuscript. We don't even know where they are. But he'll quote you the full muqaddimah, so we learn about the manhaj of the book just by reading his biography in Kataibu A'lam al-Akhyar. Obviously, Kashf al-Dhunun does that as well to a large degree. Kashf al-Dhunun of Haji Khalifa, as we'll come to that inshallah ta'ala at some point as well. However, this book does it for certain books that you may not even find in there as well. Taqiyuddin al-Tamimi rahimahullah, he wrote a book called Tabaqat al-Saniyah fi Tarajim al-Hanafiyah. This book also, half of it has been printed, but the other half is going to be printed soon. I think there are people working on it, and I'm sure we expect to, it might have already come out, but we expect to see it coming out soon. If not already, someone might know, okay, it's already come out, and I might be wrong, okay, it's not even published yet. But definitely half of it we have. Half of this book we already have. By the way, this Ibn al-Hina'i's book, Tabaqat al-Hanafiyah, the muhaqqiq of that is also Abdul Fattah Muhammad Halu, and it really is a good tahqiq of the whole book again there as well. Then you have probably one of the best books, short books. By the way, this Kataibu A'lam al-Akhyar, another unique feature of the book is this that I've written just here. He will mention the interesting rulings that have been recorded from each scholar. So he states in his introduction, this is by the way Kataibu A'lam al-Akhyar of Al-Kafawi, where he says that in the introduction of every single Hanafi or many Hanafis, he will try to make sure that he mentions some interesting details that may be found about that author, about that book, that are found within that book. He'll try to mention it from the he'll try to mention it from that book if he can. And another thing that he will try to do is that he also states that he wishes to present stories of these great scholars with chains of narration. So you will find some chains of narrations in there, but not mainly coming from Kafawi himself. Along with this, the book is extremely beneficial for finding out the chain of narration in fiqh of various scholars of the Hanafi Madhhab. So, for example, if you want to know who Quduri's teachers were, or if you want to know who, for example, I don't know, take any Hanafi, Ibn al-Humam or something like that, it's very good. He kind of does trace the asanid of various Hanafi fuqaha. By the way, I said that Muhammad Abdul Fattah al-Hallu did tahqiq of Ibn al-Hina'i's book. I think I might be wrong there. I think he did tahqiq of Tabaqat al-Saniyah, but basically it's one of these two that he did tahqiq of. You can have a look at it on internet. Both are available as well, Tabaqat al-Hanafiyah. Tabaqat al-Saniyah Half of it has been printed. The other half, by the way, is available in manuscript form, and I'm sure it'll be printed soon as well. Abdul Hayy al-Lakhnawi then wrote probably the best summarized book on the Hanafi fuqaha, which is called Al-Fawaid al-Bahiyya fi Tarajim al-Hanafiyya. This book is amazing. He states that he summarized Kata'ib Alam al-Akhyar of al-Kafawi, and according to Lakhnawi, then he states that this is the best book written in the field. That this book, Kataibu Alam al-Akhyar by Al-Kafawi, is the best book written in the field according to Lakhnawi. So he says that's why I decided I'm just going to summarize Kataibu Alam al-Akhyar, and then he then added to the book and structured it properly, which all in all took about 4 months. So he wrote the full book in 4 months. Whenever he states in the biography of a scholar, قال الجامع, then that is the point where basically Abdul Hayy al-Lakhnawi rahimahullah talking. And one of the really unique features of Al-Fawaid al-Bahiyya, which you see him do again and again, is when he writes about Hanafi fuqaha, he'll speak about the different books that the Hanafi faqih has written, and then what he'll do is he'll give you his own personal overall review of the Hanafi book. And it's really interesting. I remember our Ustad Mufti Hussain Kadodi, and by the way, I forgot to mention that as a disclaimer before this whole lesson, and I think this next comment should be taken for the full 8 lessons that are coming, which is 90% of everything that we will quote, or anything that you find interesting from the, like, wow, this is a good tahqiq, or whatever, this is an interesting point that he mentioned, I'll attribute it to Mufti Hussain, because mashallah, Mufti Hussain Kadodia from South Africa, mashallah, he essentially is, if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be able to teach this course. I wouldn't be able to even, and not to say I'm still able to, but and if there are any mistakes in what I'm saying, then don't automatically attribute it to Mufti Hussain as well. That is probably coming from my side. Anyway, so one of the things Mufti Hussain used to tell us about this book, and you notice it when you read it as well, is that it's very easy to read a book. It's much harder to give like a two sentence review of the book, wherein you cover everything about the book, or you give a certain comment on the book that basically it's the exact comment to describe the book. And that's the unique feature of Abdul Hayy al-Lakhnawi, that in the short life that he lived, and he only lived for very few years, in the sense that he never lived a very long life, 39 years or something that he lived. In that short amount of time, he read so many books, but not just that he read the book, he'll give you an overall review of what he thought of the book. So he'll say, وَقَرَأْتُهُ وَوَجَدْتُهُ, this. That's just very unique. And I remember a few times when I asked Mufti Hussain, he actually felt that Abdul Hayy al-Lakhnawi was probably one of the few scholars who did jama' between fiqh and hadith, in the sense that he knew hadith as well as he knew his fiqh, which is very rarely found, and it's probably found in the next scholar that we're going to discuss as well, which is Sheikh Zahid al-Kawthari. Probably him and Abdul Hayy al-Lakhnawi and perhaps Kashmiri, those three you could say are, in the words of even someone like Sheikh Awama, who said to us as well, when we were lucky enough to, alhamdulillah, meet him, he actually said that, that when it comes to gathering different ulum, Wallahu alam, if there's ever been people the likes of Abdul Hayy al-Lakhnawi, Sheikh Zahid al-Kawthari, and Sheikh Anwar Kashmiri, in the sense that jam'ul ulum of different funun, for example, not to compare them with any mutaqaddimin or anything like that, but just take someone like Dhahabi, right? Master in tarikh, tarajim, qira'ah, everything. But then in ilmul kalam, stuff like that, you might want to say he wasn't, Tajuddin as-Subki clearly mentions that he may not have reached the highest level in there. Whereas what we notice with these scholars is that it was like isti'ab of many ulum within their capabilities. And Sheikh Zaid al-Kawthari was definitely a unique scholar in that sense, that he probably did the greatest khidmah to the Hanafi madhab in terms of the tarajim of their main ai such that he wrote, you could say, 5 important books for the Hanafi fuqaha. The first one was Husn al-Taqadi fi Sirat al-Imam bi Yusuf al-Qadi. The second book was Bulugh al-Amani fi Sirat al-Imam Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani. He wrote a book called Lamhat al-Nazar fi Sirat al-Imam Zufar. الإمتاع بسيرة الإمام حسن بن زياد ومحمد بن الشجاع وصاحبه محمد بن الشجاع. الحاوي في سيرة الإمام الطحاوي. I should be with just sorry, without it's Tahawi without the tashdid. I apologize. In the post I wrote it with the tashdid, but anyway, so these 5 books of Sheikh Zaid al-Kawthari are absolutely filled with fawaid. It's absolutely filled to the brim with stuff which you will not find in any books. And the unique feature of it is that they've now been printed in 2 volumes, by Sheikh Dr. Hamza Bakri, and they is super beneficial, to the extent where I would say that every Hanafi student, before you get into something like Mishkat, you should have read these books of Kawthari, like cover to cover. They're not that big. It's 2 volumes, but you can cover them throughout the year. And if you've graduated and you've not read these books, I would genuinely recommend, you will benefit a lot. In fact, when you graduate sometimes from a madrasa, you sometimes feel as though, I've got to start right from the start again, or like, how can I not go right back to the bottom of the ladder? I do want to kind of carry on from the amount that I've learned. I do know a little bit. I don't want to go learn basics about Abu Hanifa's life again, or the biographies of Imam. I know the basics of Imam Muhammad and who he was. I don't want to read all that again. How can I just like, so Sheikh Zaid al-Kawthari's books are perfect in the sense that even his simple stuff, you'll find some fa'idah in there, and in what he tells you about it. So these books, 5 books that have been now printed together in 2 volumes by Sheikh Hamza Bakri, they're really good. So these 5 books, and if you remember, I recommended this book for Abu Hanifa's biography. I would genuinely recommend any student, serious Hanafi, that please read these 2 books, inshallah. These two, authors' works, they're really beneficial. Um, then there's a book by Mullah Zafar Ahmed Uthmani called Al-Imam Abu Hanifa wa Ashabuhu al-Muhaddithun, which is quite a good book as well. And it's part of his Muqaddimah to I'la al-Sunan. Then another really good book that I would actually recommend if you can get hold of it, which is Sheikh Abu Zuhra's Abu Hanifa Hayatuhu wa Asruhu wa Ara'uh. He's actually done this for every single Imam. So he's done it for Abu Hanifa, Imam Shafi'i, Imam Malik, and Imam Ahmed. He's actually even got a book on Ibn Hazm and Ibn Taymiyyah as well, which are quite good. But Sheikh Abu Zuhra's book on Abu Hanifa is probably one of the best books as well. I'd say also read this as well, but it is a bit more of a tough read in the sense that Sheikh Abu Zuhra's writings can be a bit harder to read. Not hard in terms of, but he does go into discussions which can somehow, not to say they come across as boring, but they may not be the most interesting discussion for you. So he'll go into the role of istihsan and all of that. But anyway, that was my personal understanding. But I alhamdulillah benefited a lot from this book, and I think you will find things in this book again that you don't find anywhere else as well. So Sheikh Abu Zuhra's book is really good. In fact, he actually in Kawthari's Husn al-Taqadi, in the footnotes, he actually, one of the places, he says, he actually praises Sheikh Abu Zuhra's book, his books on the Imam of the Madhahib, and he explains that he has written such good books on the Hanafi fuqaha, on the Imam of the Madhahib, and such that Abu Zuhra, when he printed this book again, some of the books on the Aimma of the Madhahib, he actually mentioned this quote of Kawthari, and he was quite young, by the way, when he met Kawthari. Kawthari was much his senior, so he found this like a really, you could say a sharaf that someone like Kawthari praised my book, even though I'm still very much younger than him. So he used to he puts this at the start of Abu Hanifa Hayatu Asru Ra'uhu, this idea, or in one of his books, he mentions this, Abu Zuhra, that, I consider it a fakhr, that, or a sharaf from Allah Ta'ala, that someone like Kawthari praised my books and he praised me for having written them. Right? We find that with Sheikh Bashar Awad as well. Sheikh Bashar Awad praises Dr. Bashar. He takes it as a sharaf that Sheikh Abdul Fattah praised his book Al-Dhahabi wa Manhajuhu fi Tarikh al-Islam. So sometimes some of these mutaqaddimin, when I say mutaqaddimin for us, in the sense that Kawthari and all of these, that would be our mutaqaddimin, their praise sometimes considered a source of real encouragement for certain scholars like Abu Zuhra and others. Anyway, so that's the books written on the Hanafi fuqaha and the Hanafi and the Imam of the Hanafi madhab. Then now I'd like to briefly turn towards the actual masail and the books written in the Hanafi madhab. Before we do that, one final thing before we come to that is to just look at the tabaqat of the Hanafi fuqaha. And we've all, if you've studied Ifta, or even if you've not studied Ifta, you might have come across the fact that there was a very famous scholar in the Hanafi madhab known as Ibn Kamal Basha. Ibn Kamal Basha, rahimahullah, he categorized the Hanafi fuqaha into various categories. As we know, we have the Imam of the Madhhab, Imma of the Madhhab, Imma of the Madhhab, and then we have the Mujtahidin the Madhhab, and then we have the Ashab al-Tarjih. So in terms of Ibn Kamal Basha's categorization, he was kind of highly criticized on that because of the fact that many scholars felt that he put the wrong scholar in the wrong category. So I've just done a reorganization of Ibn Kamal's categorization using a little bit of the ishkalat made and a little bit of the problems recognized by some of the Hanafi fuqaha or late Hanafi scholars on Ibn Kamal Basha's categorization. And there are mustaqil books, genuine books written on Ibn Kamal Basha's categorization, like Salab al-Hajj has got a book on it. Sheikh Bakhit al-Muti'i, Sheikh Bakhit al-Muti'i has also got a book uh, on the categorization of Ibn Kamal, or other books as well. How are these categorizations made, by the way? Like, who decides why? Who decides that, for example, Abu Sulaiman al-Jawzijani or Abu Hafs al-Kabir should go into this category, and who decides that he shouldn't be in this category, al-Mujtahid fil Masail? And what are these categories? So I'm just going to briefly touch upon them, uh, and then we'll come to the books, the categorization of the Masail of the Hanafi Madhab, and then we'll come to the books of the Hanafi Madhab, Riwayah books. So an important principle that we recognize is that um, the categorization of the Hanafi fuqaha of the madhab is not just based on their abilities. It's not just based on, sorry, when they died, it's based on their abilities. It's not based upon the era in which they lived, but it's based upon their abilities. But of course, what we notice is that in many cases, the scholars who came earlier had more abilities. But the principle still remains that it's based upon abilities and not how early you came. A good example of this, as we'll come to, is Ibn al-Humam. Ibn al-Humam, rahimahullah, passed away 861. He comes fairly late in the madhab, but despite that, many went as far as labeling him as even a mujtahid. If not a mujtahid, some went as far as, and he's definitely would be considered a sahib, and he's able to give preferences in the Hanafi madhab, even though the book that he wrote is a commentary on another Sahib al-Tarjih, which is Al-Hidayah. So Fathul Qadir, which is a commentary of Al-Hidayah written by Ibn al-Humam, which we'll come to later on, the author himself is a Sahib al-Tarjih, and the book that he's writing upon is also, the author is also a Sahib al-Tarjih. So Ibn al-Hina'i, should say, Ibn al-Hina'i says, well, in his Tabaqat al-Hanafiyyah, volume 1, page 156, he says, وعلم من الضابطة المذكورة أن العبرة بشأنهم في مرتبة الاجتهاد والدراية وحالهم في درجة التخريج والرواية لا بتقدمهم في الأعصار وتسابقهم في الأعمار إذ كم متأخر في الزمان أعلى مرتبة في الاجتهاد والفقه من المتقدم. Again, he's saying this, but there's not that many later scholars who surpassed the earlier scholars. But yeah, you could definitely say that some 100% did. Sheikh Bakhit al-Muti'i also says ترتيب الطبقات على هذا الوجه لا يختص به أهل عصر دون عصر بل المدار في الطبقات على الاتصاف بالصفات لا على التقدم في الزمان وإلا فكم من متقدم في الزمان وهو مقلد لا يفقه من الدليل شيئا وكم من متأخر في الزمان بلغ رتبة الاجتهاد كما هو معلوم بالبداهة. Kafawi also says in his كتائب أعلام الأخيار فإن مراتب الرجال بالفضل والكمال لا بتقدم الأزمنة والآجال. But like I said, the general pattern is that the earlier you come, the more abilities you have. As we notice, the abilities within ulama decrease over time, and that's just so many scholars have picked up on that. But anyway, so the main mujtahid mustaqil imam that we have is Abu Hanifa. Then we have al-mujtahid al-mutlaq. So they are mujtahid al-mutlaq. They have the same abilities of Abu Hanifa, but they attribute themselves to Abu Hanifa, just out of respect, you could say, or because the ability, the approach that they have in ijtihad is similar to Abu Hanifa's. And it's true. Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad's approach in fiqh was very similar to Abu Hanifa, and we've discussed this in course 2, where we discussed that they also look at legal precedent, they look at they look at Kufan precedent. Imam Muhammad doesn't just look at asanid and chains of narrations. He looks at mutun, he looks at the matan, he looks at legal meanings, he looks at the language, he looks at amalu ahli al-Kufa. All of that plays a big role in Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad's approach. So that's basically the approach of Abu Hanifa. Along with that, there is actually support to the idea that some of the aqwal of Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad was first postulated by Abu Hanifa. He's the one who gave them the idea of this opinion, and then later on he didn't hold that opinion, but they stuck to it. So Imam Abu Yusuf, Imam Muhammad and Imam Zufar would be considered part of this category, wherein they are mujtahid mutlaq, but they attribute themselves to Abu Hanifa. Then we have the mujtahidin in the madhab. What is a mujtahid in the madhab? Essentially, if I can summarize it for you in one paragraph, kind of, is they get to speak on behalf of the madhab when the ai have not spoken. They get to speak on behalf of the madhab when these individuals have not spoken. These ai Abu Hanifa, Abu Yusuf, and Imam Muhammad and Imam Zufar are referred to as the ai of the madhab. Mainly those three: Abu Yusuf, Abu Hanifa, and Imam Muhammad. But when they are silent in a mas'ala, then the mujtahid fil madhab can speak, and that will now be considered official Hanafi doctrine. That will now be considered part of the Hanafi madhab. They can speak on behalf of the Hanafi madhab, and that's what separates a mujtahid fil madhab from a sahib al-tarjih, which is that Sahib al-Tarjih can give preference when there is a ikhtilaf between the Aimma of the madhab. So when there's an ikhtilaf between Abu Yusuf, Imam Muhammad, Imam Abu Hanifa, the Sahib al-Tarjih can come and give preference to one of their aqwal over the other. However, they can't speak on behalf of the madhab. So Ibn al-Humam sometimes, when there's no opinion, or sometimes there even is an opinion and he'll have his own opinion, we don't follow Ibn al-Humam. Right? He can give tarjih. So if already a qawl has been mentioned by Abu Yusuf, Abu Hanifa, and Imam Muhammad, then Ibn al-Humam can come and give preference to one of these three aqwal. What he can't do is completely choose an opinion that none of them have mentioned, or when they haven't said anything, when Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad and Imam Abu Hanifa are silent on the mas'ala, he can't come and now speak on behalf of the Hanafi madhab, as in he can do for his own self, and that will be his own person, but it won't become Hanafi doctrine straight away unless it's accepted widely by the later Hanafi fuqaha. Basically, the Ashab al-Tarjih can't make that decision, whilst the Mujtahidin in the madhab can. Right? The Mujtahidin in the madhab can, and along with the fact that the Mujtahidin in the madhab, they can obviously do tarjih. They can give preferences between, when there's an ikhtilaf between Abu Hanifa, Abu Yusuf, and Imam Muhammad, they can give preference 100%. And when there isn't a view from them, they can actually come up with a ruling that would now be considered the official Hanafi position on that mas'ala. Right? So this includes basically mostly all the students of Imam Muhammad and the students and even students. So you notice some early Hanafi scholars there: Abu Sulaiman al-Jawzajani, Abu Hafs al-Kabir, Muhammad ibn Sama'a. These are all students of Imam Muhammad. Then you got a bit later Imam al-Khassaf, Tahawi, Abu Bakr al-Iskaf. These are students. Tahawi is actually beyond that as well. Student, as in he's two tabaqas away. And then you got Imam Tahawi and Abu Bakr al-Iskaf, al-Karhi. These are all part of one tabaqa essentially. And then you've got one tabaqa below them, which is Abu Bakr al-Jassas al-Razi, and one tabaqa below him as well, or two tabaqas below him, Quduri. And this is essentially, most of these you'll notice are Iraqi, or they come from Egypt. Tahawi is obviously Egyptian, but his studying is Iraqi studying, in the sense that they've all traveled to Iraq and studied there, or they lived in Iraq and they were studying. Quduri, as we know, became the leading scholar of the Hanafi madhab in Iraq at the time. And these are all mujtahidin in the madhab. Then we have the mujtahid fil masail, which come a bit later. You have al-Halwani, Sarakhsi, Fakhrul Islam al-Bazdawi. Sarakhsi and Bazdawi, as we know, are the two main students of Halwani, and Najmuddin al-Nasafi, and others as well. So these are mujtahid in the masail. Mujtahid fil masail is similar to mujtahid fil madhab in the sense that they extract rulings as well, but they do it using the masail of the imam of the madhab, whereas the mujtahid in the madhab usually does it by looking at Quran and Sunnah, and mainly adillah shar'iyyah, as in directly the Quran and Sunnah. Whereas mujtahid fil masail, generally will notice them going and using the aqwal of Abu Hanifa and Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad to extract a ruling on a new mas'ala. Then you got Sahib al-Takhrij. Sahib al-Takhrij, Allahu Alam, I've discussed it, but I won't go into what is Sahib al-Takhrij, but you could say it's very similar to a Sahib al-Tarjih. And this is, for example, you got the likes of Abu Abdullah al-Jurjani. Then you come to probably the most prominent category, which is Ashab al-Tarjih. And the reason why I'm going through this, by the way, is because when we go through the books of all of these scholars, it will be quite important to recognize who they were and what tabaqa they were in. So basically, the earlier the better. Hanafi doctrine is quite unique. It's a bit different from Shafi'i approach. Shafi'i approach, we notice it's kind of built around, like when Nawawi and Rafi'i come together on something, it is kind of very difficult for Shafi'is to move away from it. Whereas ours, we go as early as possible, as mutaqaddim as possible, right? We don't look at mutaakhirin the same way we look at mutaqaddimin. That's not to say we don't consider the mutaakhirin, but we definitely give preferences to, like if you found a qawl of a certain mas'ala in Sharh Mukhtasar al-Tahawi of al-Jassas, it would definitely be given preference over something you might find in the fatwa of Qadi Khan, for example. But usually that might not happen because Qadi Khan's probably well aware of everything that's been written before him. Qadi Khan might not be the best example because he's actually very authoritative in the madhab, right? But let's just say something like Bada'u Sanai. If I found something very explicit in Sharh Mukhtasar al-Tahawi of al-Jassas here, who is a mujtahid fil madhab, then looking at a Sahib al-Tarjih like Alauddin al-Ghasani, despite the fact that he's obviously a giant of a scholar with a fantastic kitab, it would probably be considered better to go with Jassas. So the Ashab al-Tarjih, you can divide them perhaps into two categories: the early generation of Ashab al-Tarjih and the later generation of Ashab al-Tarjih. In the early generation, the later generation, you could say, starts from about mid 600 Hijri, so 650 Hijri after that, so mid 7th century. And for the early generation, you could say it starts essentially around about the 6th century, so 500 Hijri onwards, up until mid 600. And in that, you've got a huge flurry of Ashab al-Tarjih coming. So you've got, for example, Sadr al-Shahid, the Ustad of Qadi, the author of Qadi Khan, the author of Fatawa Qadi Khan, basically Qadi Khan. You've got he also taught Sahib al-Hidayah, taught many great Hanafi scholars, right? Sadr al-Shahid. He's the son of Burhanuddin al-Kabir, who we'll come to later on as well. Najmuddin al-Nasafi, Abdul Aziz al-Fadli, Abdul Rashid al-Walwaliji, author of Fatawa al-Walwalijiyya, which we'll come to inshallah. Zainul Mashayikh al-Baqqali, he's got a very famous Fatawa al-Baqqali, which you'll see is quoted quite a bit. Siraj al-Ushi, right, the author of al-Fatawa al-Sirajiyya. He's also got a poem called Bad'ul Amali. If you notice, if you know, Mullah Sheikh Mufti Rada al-Haq has actually written a commentary on this called Badrul Layali Sharh Bad'il Amali. This is on the poem in Aqidah written by the author of Al-Fatawa al-Sirajiyya. His poem is called Bad'ul Amali. Then you got Al-Attabi, Zainuddin Ahmad ibn Muhammad Al-Attabi. Alauddin Al-Kasani, he wrote the author of Bada'u Sanai, for example. Then you got the author of Fatawa Qadi Khan. You got the author of Al-Hidayah, Burhanuddin Ali ibn Abi Bakr Al-Marghinani. Husamuddin Al-Razi, the author of Khulasatul Dalail. Abu Al-Ma'ali Al-Isbijabi. Burhanuddin Mahmud ibn Tajuddin ibn Mazah, rahimahullah, the author of Al-Muhit Al-Burhani. Ibn Ramadan al-Rumi, the author of Al-Yanabi'. Nizamuddin al-Marghinani, this is the son of the author of Al-Hidayah. Again, not all of these will have the same level of tarjih. For example, if you have the tarjih of Qadi Khan up against something like the tarjih of Ibn Ramadan al-Rumi or something like that, Qadi Khan is Imam, he's faqih, in the sense that his tarjih is not considered the same as the tarjih of some of the other fuqaha that is considered way ahead. Alauddin al-Samarqandi is the author of Tuhfatul Fuqaha. Then you got Zahiruddin al-Marghinani al-Bukhari, Tahir ibn Abd Rashid al-Bukhari, the author of Khulasatul Fatawa. That's him there, but he passed away after 600 Hijri. Then you got the later generations. Now you'll notice some of these names as well. Burhanuddin al-Sharia al-Mahbubi. So this is, for example, you've got the authors of Al-Wiqaya, Sharh al-Wiqaya, all going to come in here now. You got the Uthman al-Zayla'i, the author of Tabyin al-Haqa'iq, Hafizuddin al-Nasafi, the author of Kanz al-Daqa'iq, Ibn al-Sa'ati, al-Mawsi. Many of the authors of the Mutuni Mu'tabarah, they are also found in here. Why? Because if you write a book on Mutuni Mu'tabarah, which we'll come to, what are the Mutuni Mu'tabarah, we're coming to that just now, and all of the different books written in the Hanafi Madhhab, we're coming to that just now. But it's a form of tarjih. When you write, whatever you find in books like Quduri, which is a Mutuni Mu'tabarah, small mutun means a matan, means a short primer essentially, a primer, like something that's very basic, or al-ikhtiyar, or al-mukhtar, sorry, or kanzu daqa'iq, these are mutun. That is considered implicit tarjih. That is considered, they're not explicitly giving preference to an opinion, but implicitly whichever qawl you find, whichever opinion you find within the mutuni mu'tabara will essentially be considered as though they are indicating towards that view being preferred according to them. Then you might have ikhtilaf between the ashab al-tarjih. One is giving preference to one view, the other one is giving preference to another view. Ikhtilaf like that can happen, and that's where you now turn to people like Ibn Abidin to kind of help you and try to solve it for you, of how we can reconcile. Then you got Ibn al-Humam, who passed away 861. Again, like I said, I've put him in here because most of my teachers would put him there. Others would not agree, and they would demand that Ibn al-Humam is put at least into Mujtahid fil Masail, if not even Mujtahid fil Madhhab, because of the fact that Ibn al-Humam was jami' of so many different ulum, and he was such a talented individual. And Shaykh Awama quite clearly says in his Dirasa Fiqhiyya Muqarana that Fathul Qadir is the best commentary written on Al-Hidayah in terms of quality. Yes, in terms of quantity, and in terms of, like, how well explained he leaves Al-Hidayah for you, it's Al-Binayah. But Fathul Qadir is the best in terms of, just the pure fiqh and the uniqueness of the book, and the um, uh, how can I say, the independence of the author. And it's something that you notice with Ibn al-Humam, that when he writes, it's like he's not copying anyone. He writes from his own side. He's like, لا يقلد أحد. He says himself that I don't follow anyone in ma'qulat. And he says that, Suyuti's got a really interesting biography on Ibn al-Humam, and he actually considers him from the Abdal. By the way, he considers Ibn al-Humam to be from the Abdal, and he says one of the evidences that a person is from the Abdal is that he's able to read his salah really well, but really quickly. So he does all his arkan and properly, but really fast. So he says Ibn al-Humam used to read his salah very, very fast, and that's the evidence of. Anyway, nonetheless, he, by the way, he actually helped Suyuti a lot. After Suyuti, he lost his parents at a young age, so he helped Suyuti quite a bit as well. Kuthari says, lahu ayadin bayda, upon Suyuti, in helping him financially, etc. Ibn al-Humam. If you notice the death date, he's living in the time of al-Aini and all of them, and they all met each other. And so he, wallahu alam, was he aware of Aini's al-Binaya? I'm not done research on this, so if you know anything, you can let me know. But to the best of my knowledge, I think they may well have come across each other's writings, and it was, um, uh, then you've got Sahib al-Tamyiz, and these are scholars who now, they come later on, they look at all the tarjihat given to the various opinions before them, and they try to come to a conclusion of how we should approach this mas'ala now, and whose tarjih should we take on what mas'ala. And this is the likes of Ibn Nujaym in Al-Bahr Ra'iq, Al-Haskafi in Ad-Dur al-Mukhtar, Ibn Abidin in his commentary on Ad-Dur al-Mukhtar, which is Radd al-Muhtar, and Sheikh Anwar Shah Kashmiri. Again, many would not be happy with putting Sheikh Anwar Shah Kashmiri in that category there. Some would demand that we put him a bit higher, but Allahu Alam, right? Allahu Alam. Now we come to the levels of the Hanafi Masail, which is where basically we now get into the nitty-gritty of the different Masail and the different books written in the Hanafi Madhab, how we approach these Masail, what's the rulings of all of these Masail, what's the ruling of these books, which books would we go to for which Mas'ala, and how would we approach the books of the Hanafi Madhab. We hope to, inshallah, carry on from there. I do think it might be a good idea to just stop for any questions if there are any, and which I'm assuming there may well be, but if there are any, uh, we can just have a look. Okay, there was a question, where does Hasan ibn Ziyad fall in within the Tabaqat? That is a very good question, and I vaguely have come across where we might put him, but I think he would be considered a Mujtahid Mutlaq, but Muntasib, within this category here. But Allah knows best. Like I said, there's no hard and fast rule of where, look, we can disagree. Someone might put Sarakhsi a bit higher. This is where it gets even more confusing, because not everyone agrees over where everyone is put. There's not like it's not set in stone here that Quduri has to be here, or for example, Sahib al-Hidayah, there's so much ikhtilaf on him. Some demand that he's actually mujtahid fil madhab. He should go much higher. And when you look at the reality of the matter, when you look at their books, you sometimes see definitely he had so many abilities. Like I definitely, I know Mufti, my Ustad personally, I noticed that he wasn't too happy with putting Sheikh Anwar Shah Kashmiri above Sahib al-Tamyiz. But I sympathize with those who would disagree with that and say that Kashmiri was a genius and he surpasses so many of those who came before him. Because you just need to read some of Kashmiri's works and you realize he's actually read everyone's works, and on top of that he's written his own works. And he's like, the way he talks, and he's read his Majmu' Rasail, and sometimes it's like, it's genius, some of the stuff he's coming up with. About Ibn al-Mubarak, was he a Hanafi? Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak, so definitely inclination towards the Hanafi madhab, and definitely viewed Abu Hanifa like in a positive manner based on some riwayat. Some riwayat indicate that he never. I do have a section here on scholars who were like attributed to the Hanafi madhab. Like, I don't know if I've put Abdullah ibn Mubarak in there. So, like, when it comes to certain masail in the Hanafi madhab, they actually quote Abdullah ibn Mubarak as like as though he's a Hanafi. But again, uh, I'm not 100% confident on saying he's a Hanafi. I don't think it's the Hanafi madhab wasn't even a. So I think the best way to answer that question by who's the Mullah who asked it, Muhammad, is that what is the Hanafi madhab, and was the Hanafi madhab fully developed by that point by Abu Hanifa's time? Not really. Imagine you could not be a Hanafi or not a Hanafi during the life of Abu Hanifa or even after the life of Abu Hanifa. And I've discussed this, and maybe one day we'll have a course on it. But the Hanafi madhab, many feel that it actually became a proper madhab by 300 Hijri. And you could definitely now call someone a Hanafi, or you could say he's not a Hanafi. Before that, you could say semi-Hanafis, and that's the term that um, Nurit Safari uses in her book. Um, and people like many Western writers. Again, I don't like to quote Western writers as though they're authorities, which they're not. Um, but basically, this is the only thing that they do get involved in, so we can quote them on it in the sense that they're not going to write books on fiqh, are they? Because they don't believe in it, na'udzubillah, right? But they do like to write a tremendous amount about our history for some reason. But some of their works is good, so I'll quote it. But they do actually come to the conclusion that um, essentially Melchett and others, that the madhab should be considered, um, we should consider the starting of the madhab to essentially be from Karhi. Karhi is basically when the madhab really became, like, you could say it's a proper madhab now. It went from a personalized school to, you could say, like a guild to a proper legal school. And you can read about this in different books written by Orientalists as well. But you don't believe everything they say. But I'll just go to that section here, which I have got on scholars attributed to the Hanafi madhab. I mean, you can't say Abdullah ibn Mubarak, but I'll tell you one person who definitely was very inclined, and you could say he was a definite Hanafi, was Yahya ibn Ma'in. He was a full follower of Abu Hanifa. I wouldn't call him a Hanafi, I'd call him a follower of Abu Hanifa, in the sense that Hanafi does not. What is the Hanafi madhab? Inshallah, next lesson I want to cover that as well a little bit. That we don't just follow Abu Hanifa, we follow the collective thought of the fuqaha of the Hanafi madhab. So throughout the ages, we are not just Hanafis in the sense that we just follow Abu Hanifa. We follow a legal tradition of Hanafi fuqaha. Whereas Yahya ibn Ma'in was a muqallid of Abu Hanifa. So that's why Dhahabi actually says, فَإِنَّ ابْنَ مَعِينَ كَانَ مِنَ الْحَنَفِيَّةِ الْغُلَاة فِي مَذْهَبِهِ. There's actually a full book written on this by Ahmad Fahmi al-Qazzaz, proving that Yahya ibn Ma'in was a Hanafi. It's called Yahya ibn Ma'in Hanafiyan. For Abdullah ibn Mubarak, you asked about Abdullah ibn Mubarak, so there's a comment here by Dhahabi. وَكَانَ قَدْ تَفَقَّهَ بِأَبِي حَنِيفَ وَغَيْرِهِ. Abu al-Walid al-Baji says, وَمِنْ أَصْحَابِ أَبِي حَنِيفَ عَبْدُ اللَّهِ ibn Mubarak. But again, that's not enough to call him a Hanafi. There's a proof of this statement. No, that's related to something else. But basically, Dhahabi mentions this in Siyar, and Abu al-Walid al-Baji mentions this in Al-Muntaqa, page 463, volume 9. He was part of the 40-man panel. I'm not sure. Wallahu alam. I don't know. And also the closer eight. I'm not sure about that. Wallahu alam. I've again, even the 40-man council of Abu Hanifa, etc. Um, the full names of all of that. I don't know, like, to what degree we can just like assume it was that rigid. It was just those. What we can say is that it was a jama'ah that was working with Abu Hanifa, whether it was just those 40 and it would never change. Abu Hanifa lived for quite some time. He will have had many more students than just those 40. Allahu A'lam, Allah knows best. But I definitely don't want to make it look like as though Abdullah ibn Mubarak was like just studying under Abu Hanifa and that's it. He was a very big Imam and probably worthy of having his own fiqh and his own tafarrudat. And like I told you, you can't say anyone at that time was a complete muqallid of Abu Hanifa. Like there was no Hanafi madhab yet, it was still developing. If there's any further questions, if anyone would like to ask any further questions, you can write it privately as well. If you message and just change it to, instead of to everyone, just put to organizer, and then only I'll get to see it. And obviously I don't usually mention names of the person who's asking. Okay, so inshallah ta'ala, next week we do hope to have a look at some of the masail of the Hanafi madhab, how they are laid out, how best to understand these masail, what is the Hanafi madhab, how do we kind of, like in a nutshell, how would you give fatwa in the Hanafi madhab. I don't think that this is a usul ifta lesson, so we won't really be teaching usul ifta, that's not what we're doing. But just so that we understand the books of the Hanafi madhab a bit better, I will have to just give you a very brief, simple way of understanding of how Hanafi doctrine works. So then the books will make more sense when we have a look at them, inshallah ta'ala. But I hope everyone understood what the contents of this lesson. And if you have any questions, feel free to inshallah message me privately as well. I think we'll stop there for today, inshallah ta'ala. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.